Today I want to talk a little bit about my car, though. It's been leaking. There's been a water leak inside of there. That may not sound like a big deal to you, but hear me out. It's got a little bit of a leak that's been coming in. I didn't really notice it until we got back from England. I went to England in the middle part of August a little bit, and I got back, and it had been rainy a little bit while we were gone. Didn't bother me because I was in foggy London town and all of that with beautiful weather there. And got back, and I get in my car to drive somewhere, and I look over, and in the passenger floorboard, there is about 2 inches of water just standing there. And I went, uh-oh, that's not good. That's not supposed to happen. And then I have all-weather mats there, so okay, it wasn't too bad. And then I went to back up, and I started driving, and then all of a sudden, you know those lights, they call them like map lights, they're right there close to your rearview mirror? Water just starts coming out of there. Not a car guy, but I know that's not supposed to happen. I was like, this is not good. So I took about a week to try to figure out if maybe I can fix this. Maybe I, not the car guy, can figure out a way. You know why? Because YouTube exists, and maybe I can figure something out. I could not. Next thing I know, I'm calling up this company that deals with this. This is their specialty. They take time to deal with leaks in cars. And so I call them up and say, hey, I've got this leak. It's really bad. Can you help me out? And they say, yes, in 2 weeks. It's hurricane season, guys. Hurricane season. So it's raining. And so every time I'm driving somewhere, water's getting in, and then water is then coming in through those map lights and then down onto the floor, and it's stinking in my car, and I'm hating every bit of that. Well, finally, I get it in there, and they say, hey, well, it's going to cost X amount of dollars, and it was about 4 times as much as I wanted to spend, but had to do it. It was starting to become a health hazard because I had children that ride in my car with me, and I didn't want them getting mold spores inside their lungs, so we had to try to figure this out. So we take care of that. Well, everything's going great, and then a week goes by, and it rains again, and guess what? It leaked in a different place in that car. Still down onto the floorboard, but it's coming out of a different area. And so I call them and I say, hey, it's still leaking. They say, well, you can bring it back in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Fine, great. Well, before those 2 weeks is up, we had this little hurricane named Milton that come through. And I had pulled the car inside the garage for this hurricane because I just knew it was going to get soaked inside. So I pull it inside, move things around, get it all going. I wake up on Thursday morning after the hurricane has come through. My car's fine. Good news. But my back fence had blown down. And this was sad because it was a nice looking fence. It was one that had been put in before we moved in there. It was built strong and sturdy, and it fell down. So that was Thursday. And then also on that same day, my garage door opener broke. There's this little, I don't know if you know this, but on the top of those little garage door openers, there's a little thing, a little sprocket that comes up, and then that chain goes around that. Well, that thing just sheared completely off. And so now my garage door opener doesn't work. My car is leaking water, and my back fence has blown down. Woe is me. I spent all day Friday with my father-in-law. 13 hours we spent outside fixing that back fence on Friday. And on Saturday morning, I had to get up and go to Greece with some of my friends for a Journeys of Paul thing that we were doing. So I was gone all week. I came back, and then I take my car over to the Seek and Seal and Destroy shop or whatever it's called. And we take it all over there, and they start working on it. And he goes, yeah, I can't do anything with it today. Excuse me? Can't do anything right now? But it's going to rain again. I don't know. And it's going to rain. He goes, yeah, well, we're going to try, but I don't know if we can get it done. I don't know. So all this to tell you that they still haven't fixed that part in the leak of my car, and I couldn't figure out how to fix my garage door opener, even though I tried, put that off. I finally called a great company, and they came and did it for me, and we got our fence fixed and all that. And then, I forgot about this part. My check engine light came on in my car. I'm not driving around an old beater or anything, but it's starting to feel like that. I don't know if you've ever been there, but sometimes when things like happen one after the other like that, it can feel like life is just punching you right in the teeth, can't it? Maybe you've been there where it's like one big expense after another or one letdown after another, and you're sitting there going, what is happening? Why is this happening? Did I do something wrong? Does somebody have a voodoo doll of me or something like that? They're just poking all the time. What's happening with all of this? And so the other day I called Camille and I was telling her about, hey, the check engine light is on this, and I think it's this thing, and also it's going to be this much for the garage door. In that moment, I'd had enough, and I threw myself a little pity party for a second. And I'm not prone to that. I'm not one to just sit down and be sad about stuff or to worry about things. That's not my style, but all of us at some point, after enough things, you just start getting tired of things. And so I said, I'm just so sick of this. I'm really sick of it. I'm tired of it. I had terrible cars all growing up, and I just didn't want to go back to that ever. I never thought I'd have to go back to that. And as soon as the words came out of my mouth, I realized how just like ridiculous I sounded. Because this is big time privileged problems, isn't it? I got a car that works. It goes from point A to point B. That's all I've ever needed. Now, listen, when I was growing up, I had terrible cars. In fact, all of them leaked. Every single one of them leaked either oil or water or both all the time. I had two cars, for instance. And I had to fill up a jug of water, a giant jug of water, before I went anywhere because the radiator leaked. That's pretty fun on a date. Hey, you want to go on a date? Let me fill up my jug of water now. It's a lot of fun. I remember filling up, you have to go out to the radiator, fill it up before you left, and then fill up the water jug, and you take that with you to wherever you're going, and before you left wherever you went, you had to put it back in there and then go straight home. Couldn't go anywhere else. Do not pass go. That's it. I had one car that leaked so bad in the back passenger floorboard. One time, I was getting into my car and I was reaching for something in the back. Something caught my eye down there. And I looked closer. I had sprouts coming up. My car had turned into a greenhouse. And I said to Camille, I just don't want to go back to that. I never thought I'd have to go back to this. But there's people around the world who are struggling to find food today. There's people around the world. There's people in your neighborhood who don't know how they're going to make it to the end of the month with the money that they have available to them. They got way bigger problems than me. But once you've had a little bit of success, a little bit of money, a little bit of prestige, it can sometimes be difficult to not have those things, can it? Growing up with terrible cars and all that, I never once thought about nice cars. I never once thought about really just chasing after money. We were just happy to have what we had. But now that I've had a nicer car, it makes me a little mad when it doesn't work the way I want it to work. Maybe you've experienced something similar. Because once we've experienced nice things, it can be hard not to have those nice things. And because of that, money and prestige and people knowing who you are and people being deferential to you, all of that stuff, it can become a stumbling block for you after you've experienced those things, which are good things too. And when they become a stumbling block is when it does things like this. We're willing to do shadier things or things in the gray area and able to hold on to those things. We're more willing to miss big life moments so that we could hold on to money and prestige. And in this rush to hold on to this money and prestige, a lot of us end up letting go of God. One day, Jesus was at the temple, and if you're not familiar with the temple in the ancient world, we're talking about the Jewish temple in Jerusalem in the ancient world. It was the center of the universe, if you were a Jewish man or woman in those days. It's where everything happened. And remember, there was no difference between civic and religious law in those days. And so everything that happened came together in the Jewish world in the temple because that's where God lived. And they would come to the temple and they would pay their tithes. They would worship there. They would hear preaching. They would hear teaching. It was like the best thing ever once you got to go there. It was supposed to be this incredible religious experience once you were there. And one day Jesus was there and he was looking around, watching everybody, and he just got completely fed up with all these supposed teachers of the law, all these supposed ministers, all these supposed spiritual leaders who were just not living out their faith like they were supposed to. In fact, here's what happened. As he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law." They were all around him as he said this. Watch out for the teachers of the law. Now remember, there's no difference between the civic law and the religious law. These two things come together. So if you were a teacher of the law and somebody that other people would listen to about it, you were held in high esteem. You were held in a place of honor. And in fact, these teachers of the law, they weren't priests necessarily, but they were people who had often memorized the law in its entirety, 613 law and statutes. And so they were often called upon across that part of the world to come in and help settle disputes about the law. More often, they were called to come in and draw up religious/civic law contracts based on the law. They were looked to as people who knew God's law, who knew God's commands, or let's say this, they were expert in religion. So for a modern translation, let me give you my translation of what Jesus is kind of saying here. As he taught, Jesus said, watch out for pastors. Watch out for those pastors. Now, maybe you're like me. Maybe you've seen people in the news. Maybe you've seen the stuff in the news that makes you go, yeah, absolutely. Watch out for the pastors. Some of those guys, some of those girls, they do some stuff that's kind of crazy. We find out about all these pastors who maybe have had some kind of moral failure of some kind somewhere, and we're like, I knew they were all the same. But that's not true. For every pastor you hear about, there's 10,000 who are doing the right thing all the time and who are serving people well. But can you imagine Jesus showing up today and go, watch out for the pastors. Watch out for the pastors, the ones that you're supposed to hold in high esteem. Can I just remove any supposed aura you might have around me? I'm just a normal dude, and I do not have a direct line to God. I can't call up God and tell him to make it stop or start raining. I can ask. I've tried. It doesn't work. I'm just a normal guy. I love Jesus, and I've been called to ministry. So Jesus says, watch out for the pastors. Watch out for the teachers of the law. Here's why. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and in the places of honor at banquets. Now, a couple things I want you to see here. They want to walk around in flowing robes. We're going to talk about that in a second. And be greeted with respect in marketplaces. This is places where commerce happened, but it was also where discussions happened, where it was kind of like the city square, the city center. They want to have the important seats in the synagogue, so church. Right? So let's translate it this way. They like to walk around in the latest fashion trends and have everyone respect them and have a reserved parking spot at church and be celebrated by celebrities and politicians. I've seen some of those pastors around. They're all on Instagram and TikTok. Jesus says, beware. Watch out. Watch out for them. These are people who are telling you who they are and what they're about, where their heart really is at. Jesus goes on, he says, they devour widows' houses. Now a widow in that day, he could be speaking directly just about widows in particular. These were the most vulnerable people in ancient society. They had no other recourse. They couldn't even go to court by themselves unless they had a man to speak for them. Often widows were used as placeholders when talking about the most vulnerable parts and people in society. So widows, orphans, the disabled. They devour widows' houses and for show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. Devour widows' houses? That's pretty serious. It's almost over the top. Now, obviously, he doesn't mean they're eating their houses. Scholars disagree on exactly what Jesus might have meant by devouring widows' houses. Some think that it meant they went in when they went to help be called upon to make up these religious contracts, that they kind of wrote it in such a way and hoodwinked these widows who didn't know any better into saying that house is going to them when the widow died. Others think that they taught them that they needed to make sure that they paid their tithe money, and they set high tithe rates even for these widows at the expense of these widows' houses. Well, we don't really know. But what we know is Jesus is saying these supposed religious leaders, these people who are supposed to be held in high religious and spiritual esteem, these people you're supposed to be able to trust, who know the law, are doing things that make them untrustable, untrustworthy. I mean, think about that. These are people who are supposed to have memorized the entire law. The entire law. And you would think that after you've memorized something like that, 613 laws and statutes, you would think that after that, somehow you would have internalized that enough that it would come out in your life. That was the whole point. That's what everybody expected. In fact, that's what we expect of each other as followers of Jesus, right? If you are a follower of Jesus and you say that you follow Jesus and you believe in living a life that is Christ-like, and you read the teachings of Jesus, you read the words of Jesus, the words of Paul, the words of Peter, the words of these others, as you read those things, you would think that somehow that would become internalized enough in you that your life becomes this outward expression of it. Well, Jesus is saying they've had all this time to internalize all of that, and it hasn't took. It hadn't worked. They're not living as if it's true. So obviously it ain't real. Their religion is fake. Their relationship with God is fake. It's all for money. It's all for show. It's all so that they can get things out of people. It's so that they can be respected. It's so that other people can say how great they are. This is all about their ego and what they get out of it. And for that reason, these men will be punished most severely. Really? Even the one who sits up front and prays long after all of us are gone? Even the one who stands on the street corner and beats his chest and talks about how much he loves God? Yeah, even that one. Because their actions are expressions of their heart. And you can tell where their heart's at. Now, you would be forgiven if you were to stop right there. If you were to stop right there and believe that this was all about holding people accountable. And that would be a good message, I think, too. If we were to talk about we all need to make sure that our heart's in the right place and we need to be held accountable for these reasons, especially spiritual leaders, Sunday school teachers, small group leaders, ministers. But Jesus goes a little further. And we see this. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. So let's pause for a second. Now, we don't pass the plate around here, but there was a time when we did, and maybe you've been in a church where that happened. They take an offering plate, and then they pass it all the way down the row, and it snakes back like this, and all the way back. And in those days, if you've ever experienced it, especially back when everybody used cash, back before, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, like you put the cash in. One time my cousin Megan took cash out of it, and it was awesome. She was 5. She didn't know any better. But we're passing the plate back and forth doing this number. And you would look to see who was putting money in. You weren't supposed to, but you did. Imagine we still passed the plate like that. And as the plate was going, I just watched it the whole way. That's basically what Jesus is doing right now. He's set up right there across from where everybody's putting the money. He's sitting there just watching with it. And he's got his whole entourage with him, right? They're all standing there, and he's just watching. And as he watched, many rich people threw in large amounts. And they should. They're rich. They should throw in large. So they're doing what they're supposed to do. They're rich. They have the money. They have the resources. They have the ability to throw in large amounts. Also, everybody's watching, so they better, or they're going to get judged pretty harshly. Jesus is watching this, probably making people feel at least a little uncomfortable, I would imagine. At least a little bit. Well, as this is happening, a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. So you've got some rich people coming by and throwing in wads of cash, and then this little, I'm imagining, decrepit, wearing very old, worn-out clothes lady comes up and has about 2 pennies to her name and throws them in. And you hear him go in. Jesus is watching this with his disciples, with other people who are around who have been listening to him preach. They just heard him say, watch out for the teachers of the law, because they want to show you how awesome they are when they're really not. There's a natural extension here as he sits down and watches these rich people come along and throw money in a very public place, throw the money they're supposed to throw in so everybody can see it. And then this poor widow comes along and throws her money. Remember, the widow is the most vulnerable person in society in the ancient Jewish world. Her only worth, her only agency is whoever she's attached to. Is she attached to a son, a husband? If you were a widow in the ancient world without a grown son, you were in trouble. She obviously was not. Well, calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. Now you got to imagine, put yourself in that mindset. Put yourself in the mindset of everybody who was there with Jesus. Everybody who had grown up hearing all about what God could do and more was better. Obviously, if you were rich, it was because God had blessed you and your family. That was the idea, at least. And if you were poor, it was because God was cursing your family. If you were disabled, it was because you did something wrong, or your parents or your grandparents. There was this idea of generational curses passed down after generation because of what somebody had done. So if you were poor, that's God's judgment. If you were rich, that's God's blessing. If you were a widow, that's God's judgment. And Jesus says, this poor widow has put more into this treasury than all those people you think are blessed. She's putting in more than them. She's the one who's supposed to be cursed, but she's doing a better thing, a better job than they are. That's mind-blowing if you're a first century Jewish man sitting there with Jesus right then. So Jesus has to explain it, and he says it this way. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything. Look at this last part. All she had to live on. She gave everything. Everything. They rightly gave out of their wealth. They had enough. They had abilities. They had resources. They had the ability to give. They had all of that stuff. And they gave from that place. Nothing wrong with that. But she gave everything she had. It might help to show you a pie chart. Let's say the rich people gave a tithe, 10%. Well, if you have $1,000, say you have $1,000, what's 10% of that? Oh, that's a little bit slow. That's $100, right? Thank you. 6th grader, you're awesome. Some of you adults better take notice. $100. So they put in their $100. And then she has like 2 cents. And she walks up and puts in 2 pennies. Jesus says, the lady who just gave 2 pennies gave way more than they who gave $100. What Jesus is doing here is he's separating heart from ability. He decides we're going to separate out heart and ability. There's a difference between those two things. And let me show you what I mean. So on the one hand, you might have a heart for others versus the ability to work a crowd. You might have that, but you know those people who can walk in somewhere and they're glad-handing everybody and everybody loves them. They're the greatest people ever. I've got a few friends like this. They're so good at this. They can work a crowd, man. But they may not have a heart for other people. They just know what they have to do in order to get where they're going. They know that if they want those people to ever do something for them, they got to be able to work that crowd. Whereas there's others who don't really have the ability to work a crowd, but they have a real, true heart for other people. They are true servants. And if you ever needed anything, you could call them up, and they'd be there just like that. Jesus separates out heart from ability. Let's do another one. He says, what about a heart to serve God with money versus ability to give more than other people? You may have tons of money, millions of dollars that you can give. You may have the ability, but do you have the heart to serve God with your money? This is an area we don't talk a lot about in church because it's been abused over the years by some people. But the reality is every part of us is supposed to be used by God for God's glory. All of our abilities, all of our talents, all of our resources should be open to be used by God for God's glory, for God's kingdom. Now, you can have the ability to give more than others, but do you have the heart to serve God with your money? And I know that so many of you in this room do, because I know what you do with your money. You tell me about it. I know that you prop up other organizations besides this one, other ones that are doing God's good will in the world. Let's do one more. How about the heart that trusts God versus the ability to take care of yourself? This one's a little tougher, isn't it? I want to be able to take care of myself because then I can control what happens next. I can be secure in that. I feel safe whenever I'm able to secure myself. But do you have a heart that trusts God, that God is going to supply your every need? Now, we don't want to be foolish. We don't want to go out there and be dumb with our money or dumb with our resources or dumb with our own safety. We don't want to do that. But we do want to trust God, because heart and ability are different things. But if you don't hear anything else I say today, I want you to remember this. Your heart is more important than your ability. What you're able to do, your resources, all of that is not near as important as your heart. What's most important, right? It doesn't matter how much money you can give. What matters is your heart behind giving the money. Your heart is more important than your ability. Here's the good news. Maybe you're listening to me right now and you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm kind of failing this test because I really like having nice things and I've gotten used to having nice things and I want to hold on to those nice things. And so sometimes I'm not willing to give things up that I should be willing to give up. Or maybe you're hearing me talk a little bit about giving at all, and you say, well, I can't give anything at all. I've got to go on my 4th vacation this year to an exotic location. Congratulations. Maybe you find yourself struggling with this, where it's hard for you to give up something for the kingdom of God. And you're struggling with, how do I get my heart in line with God? The good news is that your heart can be developed in the same way your abilities can be developed. And when we talk about ability, we mean talents, yes, but also the ability to do something. Your heart can be developed in the same way that your abilities can be developed. And it starts with prayer. It starts with prayer. I had a friend ask me recently, hey, Josh, why should I pray? And they meant this from a really good place. They said, every time I pray, I don't get what I want. Why should I pray? Tell me as a pastor, as a spiritual leader, why should I ever pray? I don't ever get what I want, and bad things still happen to me and still happen to people that I love. Bad things still happen. Like people still go in the hospital, people still die, this stuff still happens, bad things still happen to me. Why should I pray? And so I thought for a moment, I said, the reason you pray, I think that you have a misunderstanding about prayer. You're looking at it as an opportunity to get stuff. You're looking at it as an opportunity for God to do things you want God to do. And he said, yeah. I said, that's not the way you do it. Prayer is not an exercise in getting what you want. Prayer is not an exercise in making good things happen. Prayer is an exercise in relationship building. It's an exercise in building a relationship with God and allowing your heart to be turned more into the image of God's. I said, think about it this way. Say you met somebody for the first time. Usually it comes down to one or two reasons you're meeting and engaging with the person, right? So if you're meeting and engaging with the person for the first time, usually it comes down to one of two things. First, that they're offering a service to you. Or second, you have a mutual acquaintance who introduces you. So you have or maybe your kid plays a sport, and so they're the coach of the team. Maybe it's a teacher for your child. Maybe it's a friend of a friend, and you just happen to meet somewhere, and they think you guys are going to be great friends. Or maybe it's somebody who's providing a service for you, like your local Starbucks barista, and you go there every day. You go there every day. Say you go there every day, once, twice, 3 times a day. You're the mayor of that Starbucks. What if every time you walked into that Starbucks, your conversation with them was this? Hey, I'll have my normal. Also, can you go outside into the parking lot and pick up all that trash that I saw there? Also, there's a guy out there smoking, and it's really bothering me. Could you do something about that? Can I use the bathroom while I'm here? Also, here's $5. You're not going to know much about that Starbucks barista, are you? But what if instead your relationship was more along the lines of, hey, let's just say Joni. I don't know. Hey, Joni, how are you? What's going on with you? What's going on in your world? How are your mom and dad? And you start developing this relationship with this person that blossoms into more of a friendship. Same thing with like that kid's coach of your kid's team. You start developing this relationship with that person, and you get to know more about them. And when you develop a healthy friendship with a person, no matter how it starts, when you develop a healthy friendship with them, you don't mind asking, hey, could you help me out in this scenario? Could you help me out in this situation? Oftentimes, those people who become your good friends know before you ask what you're going to need. I had friends help me move a year ago. I never asked them to. They just said, we're coming over. Now, this is kind of where the analogy falls apart. Yes, God already knows what you need. And your friends that you make, most of them will never have a problem helping you if you ask them for something. But that's not why you're friends with them, is it? You're friends because your hearts kind of mend together. Well, it's the same sort of thing with God. Our hearts mend together with God, and we become more and more like God. And we may ask God for stuff, and God is going to say, I wish I could. But when I look at the big picture that you can't see, it just doesn't work. It's not a good thing. And we need to be okay with that. But can I tell you what else happens when you become more and more, your heart gets closer and closer to God's in prayer, and you spend more and more time in prayer, and you get more and more intimate with God, and your heart looks more and more like God's? What ends up happening is your abilities become expressions of the kingdom of God, because your heart is now in line with God's heart, and your heart is always expressed through your abilities. What you're able to do, the things you have, the things you're willing to do with those things you have is always expressed. It always expresses your heart. The question is, where's your heart right now? Where is your heart? What's going on with you? Do you have a heart for other people? Do you have a heart for the kingdom of God? If so, are you expressing it through your abilities? If you're not, this might be a good time to check on that. Friends, at the end of the day, I want you to hear this. Your heart is more important than your ability. Can I pray for you? God, thank you for calling us and choosing to be our friend rather than our enemy. Please help us to become the expressions of your kingdom you want us to be. Help us to so mirror you that the world around us is changed. Lord, let our hearts look like yours. Let our hearts look like yours. In Jesus' name, amen.